My dad once asked me, what does it take to be a man in this world? I didn't know. And like most kids, I shrugged my shoulders. He then followed up with his opinion. It takes money, power, and respect. But the most important one is power. You see, with power comes money, and power demands respect. I remember when I was younger, while other kids were getting read Dr. Seuss books before bedtime, I was in the streets with my dad being educated on what being a man was all about. When I was 5 years old, I thought my dad was a man because he had a family, money, cars, clothes, and personally, I didn't want for anything. I looked up to my dad like my friends looked up to theirs. But when I turned 7, the image of my dad would be destroyed. One night, my dad told me to put some shoes on. He had some errands to run. My mother was asleep. And even though I had school the next day, anytime I could hang out with my dad, I would. We get in the car, and he starts mumbling about how money can't control people, women have a special power, and a man can have the ultimate power if he can't control the woman. I assumed he was drunk as usual, and I did not understand until we pulled up to this half-dressed woman in the middle of the street. She leans into the car and says, "Ooh, is that your baby? Well, y'all look so much alike." But at the same time, I'm like, who is this? She gave my dad some money, and he gave it to me to hold. At that time, that was the most money I've ever held. We drove off. He turns to me and said, "Now that's power." The next few weeks, nothing exciting happened. But this Saturday night, the image of my dad would start to shift. You see, my mother always took me to church. And she seemed not to mind my dad doing what he did as long as she could make it to church on Sundays. My dad was drunk and wanted to leave. And normally in this state, he did not come home for days. They started arguing. He started cussing her out. And the next thing I knew, he hit her. Again and again. And I, shocked and terrified, I yelled out the one thing they told us to do when you see someone in danger. "Stop! Or I'm gonna call the police." He stopped hitting my mom, turned to me and started laughing. "Call the police. This is my house. I can do whatever I want." He got up, stumbled towards their bedroom, and passed out. I guess that's what power is. You can do whatever you want and not face any consequences. One morning, my dad tells me to put some shoes on. He had some errands to run. We picked up his friend, and we drove to the local crack house. While the friend went inside, my dad and I stayed outside. But a few minutes later, a guy comes up, jumps out of a car, yelling and screaming, waving a gun. My dad runs behind our car, and he tells me to go in the house to notify his friend on what is going on. As soon as I walked in, the owner of the house told me to get out. He didn't want any trouble. So I turned around. And when I turned around on the porch, the guy with the gun is staring at me, points the gun, and pulls the trigger. But the clip dropped out of the gun. All of a sudden, it clicked with my dad, and next thing I knew, we were in a car chase. But the guy with the gun eventually got away. But the only thing I could think of when I was sitting in the car, my dad can hit on women, but when it comes to defending his son after a man pulled a gun on him, he ran and hid. At that moment, the image of my dad being a man was destroyed. Some power he had. As I got older, those moments stayed with me. And every decision that I made were based off those moments. Fortunately, until I moved out, my mom kept me in church. And it wasn't just going just to say I went, but the relationships that I was able to develop in church helped reshape my views on what a man looks like. And because of those relationships, at 17, I moved away. Because I knew if I didn't, the only place for me was either the grave or jail. And at 5'4" at the time, I was too small to go to jail. And at 5'6" today, I'm still too small to go to jail. Today, my parents are still married. And we have a better relationship because in my search for power, I found the truest power one can possess. And that power is forgiveness. A few years ago, I called my dad up. And I forgave him for everything that he did. But I also asked for forgiveness for everything that I did. Why? Because a man forgives. Now that's power.